Yep.
Welcome to Into Theology. My name is Wyatt Graham, and I'm joined with Professor Ian Clary. We are continuing to study great works of theology, and we're in our second week of studying the great work of Job. We're probably going to do this for 4 weeks. I'll let Ian describe kind of what we're going to do and then open up with a reading from Job 28. So go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, so we kind of introed the book, talked about some themes in the last podcast, and then we mentioned in that one that we're going to be addressing particularly the theme of retribution in this. And I noted in that previous podcast we're going to have a special guest to join us at the end. And so not today, not next recording, but the fourth in this 4-part series, we're going to be joined by a philosopher named Owen Anderson. And Owen, he teaches at Arizona State University, and he's actually writing a philosophical commentary on Job, which I'm reading through right now, and it's really, really helpful. And so it'd be good to just kind of like have like a kind of a summarizing kind of discussion with Owen. So what we've been working through in preparation for this, it kind of really culminates in the centerpiece of the whole book of Job, which is what is wisdom? Where is it to be found? And the kind of centerpiece is Job 28. And so this is his sort of like famous hymn to wisdom. I'm just going to read that to kind of set the stage for what he's really looking for when he's looking for God in the midst of his suffering. So Job 28 and verse 1. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place for gold that they refine. Iron is taken out of the earth and copper is smelted from the ore. Man puts an end to darkness and searches out the farthest limit, the ore in gloom and deep darkness. He opens shafts in a valley away from where everyone lives. They are forgotten by travelers. They hang in the air, far away from mankind. They swing to and fro. As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up as by a fire. Its stones, the place of sapphires, and it has dust of gold. That path no bird of prey knows, and the falcon's eye has not seen it. The proud beasts have not trodden it. The lion has not passed over it. Man puts his hand to the flinty rock and overturns mountains by the roots. He cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eye sees every precious thing. He dams up the streams so that they do not trickle, and the thing that is hidden he brings out to light. But where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says, "It is not in me," and the sea says, "It is not with me." It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. From where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Abaddon and death say, "We have heard a rumor of it with our ears." God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave to the wind its weight and apportioned the waters by measure, when he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder, then he saw it and declared it. He established it and searched it out. And he said to man, "Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding." And it's like you can see, it's almost like a climax of the whole book. You know, we're going to go on in the next podcast to talk about God's response to Job and all that sort of stuff, but we can't lose sight of the importance of Job 28. And it's you know, as we kind of noted in the last discussion about this, that there's this kind of poetic language, and the kind of poetic form gets really heightened at sort of key points. And man, the poetry here is just so beautiful. I mean, he's going on this like length for the first 11 verses, just describing how man searches after precious stones, gold and various types of the Ophir and coral and all that kind of stuff, pearls. And it's like, we go to such lengths, we dig holes deep into the earth, places where nobody else knows about them, to try to find these things. And then there's this question that happens twice in verse 12 and verse 20. Where's wisdom to be found? we go to all these lengths for these other things, and they're so precious to us. But wisdom is infinitely more precious. Where is it to be found? And he gives us this great answer in verse 23. God knows. God knows where it's to be found. Turn to him and you'll find it. And where is it? Verse 28. What is wisdom? Oh, it's the fear of the Lord and a turning away from evil. That's very powerful.
We're talking too about this poem, and it's interesting. So in English, if you want to emphasize something, you can underline, you can make it into italics, you can make it into bold. In ancient Hebrew, the way to emphasize something was to kind of place it in a unique, among the text, to put something in the middle or maybe at the ends. In Job 28, it's kind of in the middle of the book.
Yeah.
And that's actually a place of emphasis often in writings. So while we might think it's weird that it's just kind of plopped in the middle of these conversations,
yeah,
at least according to some sort of ancient standards, this is actually just a way to kind of make it all in bold text or in all cap letters or whatever. It's meant to draw our eyes to it. I think it's preparatory probably for God's revelation at the end.
Yeah.
I think it's
a rebuke. I think it also functions as a rebuke to the friends, you know. It's like, we're going to talk about retribution here. It's like they think they've got their wisdom, right? They figured it out. They know what God's doing here. You know, you're being punished because you're wicked. And Job's like, I'm not wicked, guys. I'm sorry. Like, you get all of Job's responses, and it's like as each conversation goes on, you can almost see the three friends getting hardened. It's like they say, here's what's going on with you, and Job's like, no, it's not it. And they're like, it's almost like they double down on him, and he's like, no, guys, this isn't, you're wrong. That's not what's happening here. Where is the real wisdom then? It's not to be found in these so-called friends of his. Job's saying actually the wisdom is just to be found in God alone.
Well, it is interesting that the introduction and conclusion to Job maintain that he was upright. And as you know, there's this idea of retribution. So I think it's called the Retribution Principle. Maybe that's just how I've heard it. Maybe people talk about it differently. But the idea is, in the ancient world, there was just an assumption about how everything worked. It's kind of like gravity is so obvious to us today. Everyone thinks you drop an apple, boom, gravity pulls it to the ground, or however they think about it. In this world was, look, if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. If you sin, something's wrong. So John chapter 9 is an illustration of this.
Yeah.
Why was the man born blind? Was it because of his sin or someone else's? So actually, it was to glorify God. That's the answer.
Yeah.
Job, why did something bad happen to him? Was it because he sinned or someone else? Answer is to vindicate God before Satan, in part at least.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to realize that the conversationalists, Job's friends, Eliphaz, Zophar, and so on, Bildad, are assuming the retribution principle is true in various ways. So they'll tell him, you must have done evil. You must have done bad.
Yeah.
Job will not admit that. And I think that's striking to a lot of us today, because when you read the old, like, we believe that we're in sin, totally depraved, and so on. But sometimes I read the Psalms where, David will be like, I've done right. I'm innocent. Or whoever will, like that kind of language is in scripture anyway. And it strikes us as like, well, you could never say that. But there actually has to be a category for that, because the Bible says that. So if our theological categories exclude the idea that you've been upright in a situation, then we're probably off kilter to some degree. I'm not saying we're not totally depraved. That's just so people are listening. That's not my point. But
You're
I'm saying
an Arminian.
No, I'm just saying there has to be a category for this. And the retribution principle then is maybe a good proverbial wisdom, but that always has exceptions. Sometimes you work really hard and it comes to ruin because of war, famine, disease. Sometimes you have an easy life and you get wealth and prosperity and goodness. It's not really because of your moral failings or success. It's because of God's mysterious providence, in short.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing because you go to the second half of Job 24, and Job's making that exact point.
Oh,
right?
is he?
Yeah, he's basically saying, like, so I guess Job 24, let's see here, say verse 12. Okay. From out of the city the dying groan, and the soul of the wounded cries for help, yet God charges no one with wrong. There are those who rebel against the light, who are not acquainted with its ways, and who do not stay in its paths. The murderer rises before its light, that he may kill the poor and needy. And in the night, he's like a thief. The eye of the adulterer also waits for the twilight, saying, no eye will see me, and he veils his face. In the dark, they dig through houses. By day, they shut themselves up. They do not know the light. For deep darkness is morning to all of them, and they're friends with the terrors of deep darkness. He's like basically saying here, these guys are getting away with it. They're in hiding. They're doing what they want, and nobody's doing anything. And it's the same kind of idea. It's like, how can these guys get away with stuff? And yet here's Job, who's righteous,
Right.
and he's suffering.
Here's where it gets real practical. Psalm 73. The psalmist there, whose name is, I'll remember it probably in a moment, but he's really perturbed because the evil seem to have success.
Yeah.
And he's served God his whole life. He's not getting what he thinks is coming to him.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he comes to what I would argue is an eschatological conclusion. God will judge.
Yeah.
Vengeance belongs to the Lord in the, Deuteronomy, but Roman sense. And that seems to me has to be part of the answer because, and let's go practical. Let me stay practical for a second, actually. It's really easy for us when someone confesses sin or is going through a hard time to think, what did you do wrong?
Yeah.
Job tells us possibly nothing. What doesn't that change how you do counseling? If someone comes to you and they're having a hard marriage or they're suffering in some way, our immediate response should not necessarily be, "Oh, how were you a bad husband?"
Yeah.
It could be, by the way. I'm not saying it couldn't be. I'm saying,
Right.
but that should not be our only response. It could actually just be because suffering is real and it doesn't always follow the retribution principle.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it also takes away this feeling that we ought to be jealous because if we think, I've done so good, I ought to be as famous as this person or have this much good rewards. It really removes that expectation. If it happens, great. Sometimes it does, probably more often than not, it does. Hard work begets success. Not always, though. And I think that's it's just so practical for how we view life. It erases the feeling of we deserve this, so it doesn't make you prideful. But it also releases you from the feeling of judgmentalism because you don't know.
Yeah.
Both of those things, should not be a primary ways that we do biblical counseling, if I want to use that kind of language.
We need to do Job counseling. That's what we need to do.
It's at least giving you insight into the human condition that we don't always get from our standard sets of wisdom. So
it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to go back to Job 28.
Yep.
So where is wisdom? It's not in Job's friends, apparently.
Nope.
So where do we find what is the answer? I mean, the last verse. So fear God and do good or avoid evil.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar, right, to what we were looking at a couple weeks ago. The very end of Ecclesiastes too, it's like, whoa, it's like the core, as I'm reading in Job and thinking about Ecclesiastes in the back of my head, I'm like, man, the correspondences are so profound. And so it's behold the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, which we see in Proverbs as well. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Right? To turn away from evil is understanding. And you can kind of see it like all throughout like these pockets in Job where, he's making these sorts of similar kinds of statements. They're almost like, it's like it seems like a buildup. Like if you look at Job 14:14, he says things like, if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service, I would wait till my renewal would come. And so he's looking for a kind of like, what is this renewal that he's looking for? He says in 16:2, he's miserable with all of his comforters, right? He says in 7, God now has worn me out. He's made desolate all my company. So those are taken away from him. He says, again, I think it's in 17:10, but you come on again, all of you, and I shall not find a wise man among you. Can't find wisdom anywhere in anybody. And then in 19, it's like it gets really rough. He says first, he's like in verse 4, even if it be true that I've erred, my error remains within myself. It's nothing to do with you people and your wisdom. And then he says in 19:13, he says, those who knew me are wholly estranged from me. He says that his guests, his maidservants count him as a stranger. He's a foreigner in their eyes. 19:17, he says that his breath is strange to his wife. He's a stench to the mother of his children. Even his young children despise him. He's completely alone.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Suffering and estrangement. it strikes me that a lot of the reason why suffering stinks
And he
is
says it's
because of
estrangement.
estrangement.
Yeah, right.
When you don't have supporters, when you're going through a hard marriage or something with your children or some public event, and your friends either are like Job's friends, what did you do wrong?
Yeah.
I'm here to help. What did you do wrong? Let's fix it.
Yeah.
Or because it's too awkward, they pull away.
Yeah.
That is a kind of estrangement that it's not good.
It's brutal. It's alienating, and you feel alienated from your own self.
And you can imagine in some in some kind of Christian circles, there is this idea that if there's a sinner, like someone sins, that there's a real sense in which they're impure now from the community.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how that works. I mean, there's obviously different categories for this, but I'm talking about standard sin.
Yeah.
We tend to kind of move away or kind of be judgy, or we don't want to get tainted by that. I don't think that's what Jesus did.
No, he didn't. The opposite. He was willing to take the taint into himself.
He took all the evil of humanity in himself at the cross. And
Yeah.
one of the things is, even if you say, well, in his life, you can kind of qualify things, the cross doesn't qualify. The cross is an open, universal acceptance of all the evil in the world.
Yeah.
He was, I saw this actually on Facebook. Maybe it's a common thing, but it was God in the hands of angry sinners.
Oh, yeah. Jonathan Turtle.
Yeah, the Turtle, Mr. Turtle.
Love that guy.
I don't know if he invented that or someone else has said that, but it's right. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
You want to be careful of how you mean God there, but he's right.
Right.
And there's just something to that. The New Testament talks about how we should come alongside people, weep with those who weep, grieve with those who grieve, encourage the faint-hearted, and so on. I think that's right. Something like that. Anyways, I think sometimes we miss real counsel is sometimes not having the answer, but actually just being a friend and not abandoning someone.
And you see that with Job's friends. The best thing that they do for him is when they sit for that week, right? When everything happens.
That's a good point.
Sit quietly and mourn with them. And that's it,
You have the abandoners, the wife who says, curse God and die. And then you have the helpers who try to fix the problem, but they're trying to fix it by there must be some problem in your life to fix. I think all of us who want to use the Bible to counsel people can fall into this trap. We have so much biblical text in front of us, and we think there must be a single problem that I can apply a particular Bible verse to fix it.
No.
That wasn't true with Job at all.
No.
He was upright and good. Everything that was happening had nothing to do with him. Everything to do with Satan's or God's challenge to Satan, however you want to put it.
Right.
With that divine theodicy, the vindication of his goodness, or his worthiness, whatever you want to say it. And that tells you, like, I think this is just so important. I'm gonna say one more thing, then I'll let you go.
No.
Or let you talk. I don't mean, you don't have to leave. Go in terms of add your own. I just think this is so important that we need to be so careful not to be fixers, but to be co-sufferers with Christ. Hebrews 10 talks about people being in jail, and the congregation there is said to be sympathizers. But that sympathy that with suffering is the kind of root of it. That's what it means more literally there. They've suffered alongside of them. I mean, this is Christ as well. I believe it's Hebrews 4 that he has. He sympathizes with our weakness, and that sympathy there is, again, it's because he's incarnated. He knows our suffering. He suffered alongside of us in the more literal sense. Sympathy in English sometimes no longer has that literal sense of co-suffering. It has more to do with, I don't know. You feel, sympathy card. Okay, sorry, you go. I talked a lot.
Well, no, but bang on right with that, right? So, like, because what's happening is that he's having this experience, right, of this alienation as you're talking about, and he feels even estranged from God too. It's like, why is this happening to me? And where is God? And he needs him. And that's this kind of hope that he's looking for. A textbook that I use for my worldviews and world religions class here at CCU is a small little book called Enduring Divine Absence by Joe Minnick. Joe's a friend of mine through the Davenant Institute. And even just the title, Enduring Divine Absence, like when God is far, it's like it's brutal. Like it's like you've got to endure through it because it's so awful when he's absent. And my students all resonate with the book because they're like, oh yeah, when God feels far, it's awful. And you've got that same sense here in Job, and yet he can get through and he can endure because there's this hope that he's looking for, right? And so he's saying these things like, oh, I'm a stranger even to my wife, my kids hate me. And then at the end, in near the latter part of 19, this amazing statement, right? In verse 25, he says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. And he says, my heart faints within me. It's like he's gonna die, and he's dying alone, and yet he knows that there's something beyond. I don't think he knows what it is, but he's got this sense that God's going to redeem him, and he's going to see God face to face. And it's like this kind of like what we now know more in a broader canonical sense. There's an anticipation of a resurrection, I guess, here, but I don't even know if Job's aware of that.
This reminds me so much of Psalm 73 again. It's Asaph. I looked. He said, so basically in chapter 19 of Job, everyone's become a stranger and alienated from him.
Yeah.
The only person that Job finds is left is his Redeemer.
Yeah.
Asaph says at the end, all these bad things happen. I was brutish and ignorant towards you. Then he says, nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will receive me to glory. Yeah. Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. Yeah. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Kind of reminds me of that in the sense of there's nothing else but God available to Job. Like we talk about that, you should get saved. I mean, no one can save you, no one else but God alone, Christ alone. But a lot of times it doesn't really hit us because we have lots of friendships, family, you know what I mean? But yeah. Job is at the bottom. I mean, as I understand it, John Calvin preached like over 120 sermons on Job.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And his theology is essentially God brings you to the bottom so that you can trust in God fully, kind of deal. So maybe I'm wrong on John Calvin's sermon, but I think if my memory serves, that was...
Well, definitely, he preached extensively.
He preached on it anyway. I think I might be misremembering, but whatever. Yeah. So I think it's fascinating. I have a baby crying beside me. You can probably hear.
I love it because remember in the last recording,
yeah. Mike. It's actually a 2-year-old, so I'm gonna go ahead and say maybe a toddler because he's toddling about. I'll quickly pause this. All right, the toddler toddled out, and so we can keep talking without me at least being distracted. Other people probably like it. It's a cute kid, right?
I loved it. I thought it was great. But like what he's saying, like in terms of this hope, right? So Job 27 and verse 8, he's talking about the wicked. He's just described himself in verse 6. I'm going to hold fast to my righteousness. I'm not letting it go. And then he says in verse 8, what's the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life? Nothing. If you're wicked, there's no hope for you, man. And so where he's clinging to God, as it were, with the hope that he's going to see God, even if it's not in this life. It seems like, it's the same. It's kind of the same idea. Back to the Ecclesiastes, all this under the sun is all relative. Even your death is relative. It's the vapor. What is most significant is what is above the sun. And it sounds like Job's kind of saying the same sort of things here. I don't know if he's got a full-throated view of what resurrection looks like, but he's got some sort of hope in God that will transcend somehow physically his own death.
Well, I think Job ends up showing us what everybody ought to be able to discern, namely that you do need a redeemer, and there needs to be something. He actually, in chapter 3, basically wants death because of his suffering, but that doesn't eliminate his hope. I mean, Job was, in some sense, like how should I put this? His experience did not prove the retribution principle. His experience was life is very bad. Yeah. but he's able to still have hope in God. So whatever he knows from nature, whatever he knows as a priest of God outside of the Abrahamic covenant and line, he knows, like Melchizedek in Genesis 14, he knows something. So whether he knows about the resurrection, in one sense, he doesn't need to, because he knows that there is hope in the Redeemer.
Yeah.
He looked forward to it. He knew about it. He didn't maybe know the details like we do after Christ. But I think this ends up showing us it's essentially a gospel truth. He basically gets to the point where, according to his experience, he realizes he needs a Redeemer.
Yeah.
I think everybody who lives can get there. They can't get the next step, which requires the word of the gospel.
Yeah.
But everybody knows they need a Redeemer. And I think you know that through a confrontation with God's law in Scripture, or a confrontation with natural law in nature. Both are God's way to be super Lutheran in a sense, to bring us low so that we might look to what's higher.
It's interesting. So talking about Owen Anderson, who we're going to have on a couple episodes from now, he gives this interesting summary. So I have a copy of the manuscript of his book. It's still in process, so it's just draft. But he talks about for chapter 28 of Job. He describes it as a parable, and there's a hymn or a poem to wisdom, and then he gives a kind of summary, and he says this, and I thought it was kind of helpful. He says, so the summary of Job as a philosopher: behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. It is such an early time in human history, and he is already affirming this. Philosophy should get us there because of the very name of it. Do we love wisdom? Then we'd pursue it like this, and we would not end up in biblical atheism. He's got a whole discussion of what he calls biblical atheism that's like sort of expressed in the various trends. They've got like a kind of view of God, but they're like practical atheists. And he says, if we pursue it like this, we would not end up in biblical atheism, affirming some kind of demiurge or first cause is no longer acting out in the world. The summary of Job's teaching: have you considered God's servant Job? You're like, whoa, yeah, you're right. Like, it's not just to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? It's actually to all of us. Look at what Job did. Should we not pursue wisdom in exactly the same way? But that's tough, because that's a brutal path to walk.
It's a brutal but necessary path. And I like the category of biblical atheism.
Yeah.
It reminds me, like Proverbs says to study the ant. Ecclesiastes and Job obviously tell us to seek wisdom where it can be found. Yeah. Ultimately, it's God. Ultimately, it's Christ. But it's throughout everything. I mean, through our experience, through nature, everything we see is evidence of God's, I mean, to use Calvin, fatherly care.
Yeah.
We can see God in creation in limited but yet true ways. Yeah. Limited because we can't, I mean, Job didn't know exactly what was going on either until God tells him at the end, well, actually, it's because you're human and I'm God. You're limited by definition. And therefore, our ability to discern life, even our suffering, all those kinds of stuff, is completely limited. And that's actually good because we're not God.
Yeah, he gives and it's funny, I realized something too, where he has an earlier statement to in one of his replies to his friends, where he says effectively what God tells him at the end. I noted it, now I can't find it. Even this, I mean, going back to what we were just saying, right? Even in 13:15, though he slay me, I will hope in him. Wow. That's such a commonly quoted verse, and yet at the same time, you actually start digging in, and you've got this all kind of rolling around your head.
Or even 13:3, yet I would speak to Shaddai, and I wanted to speak with God. Can you imagine? I mean, he gets to, in a sense, although his answer is, I repent in dust and ashes.
Yeah, I can't find that verse. I wish I could find it, where he basically says exactly to God what God actually will say to him at the end. He's like, I wasn't there when God created all this stuff. Yeah, the biblical atheism thing is neat in Owen Anderson. It's probably something we should talk to him about when we interview him. But he looks at Job 22:12 as a kind of like example of this biblical atheist, which Owen will kind of link to the kind of contemporary materialist or the atheist today. And he says, because in 12, it's almost like Epicurean. He says, So 22:12 is not God high in the heavens? See the highest stars, how lofty they are. But you say, what does God know? Can he judge through the deep darkness? It's like God's so far away. If he's there, he doesn't really do anything, and it's Epicureanism is effectively atheism. Maybe God's there, but he's not really doing anything, and I was like, whoa, like that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm. God has not come near to us. I like it. I think this might be, we've talked a number of topics here. I think we can maybe close it down for today. We have 2 more episodes left.
Let's leave it for the next one.
Yeah, there's so much more we could say. I think this is a good summary. I mean, where is tourism found? It's found in avoiding sin, fearing God. We should seek it. Maybe a summary statement could be, we seem to undervalue the love of wisdom. We view that as an ivory tower thing, or something that a Christian maybe doesn't need to participate in. But actually, I think God calls us to be wise, to study the world. There is, if your vocation is biology or medicine or whatever it is that you can study the world, geology around you, this is good and right and wholesome, and as part of your Christian vocation. Wherever we find ourselves in life, we should use and seek wisdom. Ultimately, though, we have to admit that there's limits. And finally, the most important thing is to fear God and to avoid evil, because we're so limited. We actually can't handle it all. We can't fathom the depths of the wisdom that is in God. Yeah. So that's it. Let's stop for today, and we'll see you next time.